Today we're going to learn how to composite the green screen footage we just shot. If you go to D2L, you'll download the green screen video we completed in class, our background, which is Ice Cave, and a little bonus video called Swarming Bats. Next thing we'll do is open up Adobe After Effects. And here we have a project panel, we have an effects panel. This is the canvas where we'll work on our compositions. Down here's the timeline, and then we have available to us a bunch of effects and filters. First thing we'll do is we'll save this project in that folder, File, Save As, and in that very same folder that we have our elements, which I called Compositing, we will save this composition. Like Final Cut and Premiere and Avid, the After Effects references the video and doesn't save to the video. So by keeping everything in this folder means that we keep all of our assets together with the project. Next thing we'll do is we'll import that footage. So we can either go File, Import, File. We can use Command I or just double click in the project panel and it will open the import function. Go to Compositing and I'm going to hold down the Shift button and select all three of these, and we'll bring them in as footage, and I will say open. Okay. Next thing we are going to do is we are going to create a new composition, and we'll call it green screen final, and put down your name, right? So when you upload it, it'll all be cool. We want it to be HD TV 1080 29.97, right? So that's 1080p, and it should come up 1920 by 1080, and let's make it 10 seconds long. And now down here is that project. First thing we're going to do is bring in our ice cave. So I'm just going to click, and we can either drag it down here or drag it onto the comp. I'm just going to drag it down here so it centers. And our image is just a little too small. So I'm going to twirl this down here and twirl down transform. And I'm going to click on this number and drag to the right to increase it. Okay. That's one way to do it. I'll hit Command Z. We can also right click or control click in the sub menu, and we can find transform, and we can say fit to comp, and it'll do it as well. Okay. So then this is the background that we lit our green screen with, but we want to create a foreground element out of these ice formations in front. And so what we're going to do is we're going to keep this as the background, and I'm going to hit Command D to create a duplicate file, and I'm going to, with that top layer selected, I'm going to hit return, and I'm going to type in foreground and hit return to get back out of it. And now we're going to create a mask that will cut this shape out. And if you need a little more room on your screen, you can set it at 50%, and then it might give you a little more room. But if you want to be more detailed with your work, you can tell it to fit up to that size. Alright, now I'm going to select the mask tool, and it's important that we do this in one continuous run. So what I'm doing is I'm clicking and then I'm dragging with the mouse a little bit to put some bends in our line. And I'm just going to go around and I'm going to cut out this foreground shape. We want to be fairly accurate because our subject will be walking behind this, and it will reveal the artifice of cinema if we don't do a fairly decent job. So now I've my primary mask point is here. So if I start clicking again here, we're going to create a second mask, and this is all going to go to hell. So what we want to do is we just want to make sure that the last one is clicked before we proceed with the rest of our mask. And here we can get a little sloppier. Because our subject won't be walking behind that. And so if we turn out the eyeball, we will see that we've completed a foreground mask, and then our background mask is complete like this. Now if you weren't able to complete it, let's twirl down our foreground and twirl down masks, and if you have more than one mask, if it says mask 1 and mask 2, then you're going to need to delete one and select this mask, pick the last point you started from, and then complete the mask. I'm going to twirl down this mask, and to make it look a little bit better, we're going to feather the pixels 3 pixels so that when our subject walks in front of it, rocks behind it, it won't be as sharp. Okay? Next thing we're going to do is we are going to drag our green screen footage. Hold on. Get back to our comp. We're going to twirl these closed. We're going to drag our green screen footage between the two comps. And what we will do is we're going to so let's scrub through this. And she's walking and she's scared, and the bats are striking, and we kind of want the bats to attack somewhere around second 7, second 8. Actually, let's make it second 7, so I'm going to slide it down a little bit. And then, and you'll notice that we don't have enough footage after that. So we're going to, this is our render bar, so I'm going to pull down our render bar and make that there. Okay. So we've got our green screen footage. And what we'll do is she's at her end point, so this is where we'll make our anchor point, is at the end. And the anchor point is this little crosshair right there. And so what we'll do is we're going to click on this object called the pan behind tool, and we're going to put that crosshair right at the base of her feet. And what that does is that when we get to our transform properties, if we want to rotate, it rotates around that. If we want to scale, it scales around that. Okay? So she's not going to walk much farther than this, right? So this is her forward part, and we're going to make a mask that will basically only leave the green and we'll see. And then we'll scrub backwards in the timeline and make sure that she's still within this mask. And if your mask accidentally covers her, then you'll need to adjust it to be a little bit larger. But we want this to be all green. Okay? Next thing we're going to do is we are going to key out the green screen. I'm going to lower this just a little bit. Okay, so with this layer selected, we're going to come over here and we are going to go to keying, and we are going to take key light, and we are going to click and hold and drag and drop it right in that layer. And then over here we have our project items, and that opened up our effects. Okay, first thing we're going to do is we are going to select our key color, and we'll pick that right there. And that does a pretty good job, but as you can tell, let me zoom in a little bit. Zooming in is 200%. You'll see that it's not perfect, that things are a little gray. And another thing that can be helpful at this point is I'm going to turn off seeing our mask tool, and by clicking this little button here, that turns that off. And so the next thing we want to do is we want to adjust our screen mat. And so in View, we are going to put it in screen mat mode. And then we are going to twirl down our screen mat, and first thing we're going to adjust is the black clip. So I'm going to click and drag to the right with this until everything is black within our key. Right? So click that on, everything is black within our key. And then I'm going to click and drag our white clip until she is solid white, like that. And let's pre-blur this 0.5 pixels. What that does is just soften the edges a little bit. And now let's go back to our final result and see what she looks like. Okay. All right. So let's fit up to 100% so we can get our size. I want to turn back on our foreground, so let's position her so she lands right about here when our bats show up. And I want her to be a little bit bigger, so I'll click and hold and drag to the right. Walking in, and then our bats attack. Okay, next thing we want to do is we want to color correct her, and so let's go over to color correction, and let's do something simple and easy. Let's just grab color balance, and we will drag that, click and drag and hold that into the GS2 layer. And what we want to do is we need to make things a little more blue and a little more green. So let's start with the shadows. So by dragging to the right, we'll make things a little more green. And by dragging right, we'll make the shadows a little more blue. And let's do the same thing with the midtones. Make her a little colder. And let's see if we want to make that a little greener. Okay, now she feels like she's kind of part of the space. Let's mess with the blue highlights. Nope, too blue. Okay, so now she's much colder and feels like she belongs in this space. So the next thing that we are going to do, though, is when you're compositing, it doesn't really feel like your subject is in a cave or in an environment until they cast a shadow. And if we look at our light source, we see that it's coming from behind her, so she'll be casting her shadow forward. And so we'll click on GS2, and we will hit Command D and duplicate it, and we're going to want the bottom layer to be the shadow. So I'm going to click on that one, hit return, call it shadow so we can keep it straight, and then we're going to click on this 3D mode right here. And then we will twirl down our transform, and then we will adjust her X rotation, and we want her to come forward, right? Let's go ahead and do it 90 degrees, and we will then we'll pan it with the Z rotation so it's in front of her. And let's walk her back. Okay, So when she's here, we will, on position, we're going to click on the stopwatch and click a keyframe that will pin her to that spot. And then we will adjust her shadow so that it walks with her at that spot, and it will automatically put a keyframe there. And I want to make the shadow a little longer, scarier, and let's make it a little fatter. And we want it a little higher so that it touches her feet. So let's see how that travels with her. Okay. So this is good here. So I'm going to click up to there, it's good. And then the shadow gets a little low, so we'll push it back up on here. Okay. Now let's make our shadow look a little shadowier. We will, first of all, close it up, and we'll keep the key light. We will basically we'll lose the color balance, and we'll come over to hue and saturation, and we'll drag that in here, and we will take out all the saturation so it's black and white. And then we want to soften it, so we'll add something called fast blur to it. And let's see, what, 10 pixel blur, that's too much. Oh, it says 110. Let's just try 10. Okay, so I'm going to click and drag this until it's a little softer. And then I'm going to decrease the opacity. Now let's take a look at that. So now she's walking in the cave, her shadow is following her, and it looks like a shadow. Okay, so now we got to worry about our bat attack. So this is right before she freaks out. And so what we're going to do is we're going to drop our bats on top of that. So we'll click on Project, and we'll take our bats and we'll drop them on top. And I'm going to click and drag this right here so that they enter and she spazzes out. And then I'm going to shorten up our render time. Now I'm going to hit 0 on the keypad, and what that's going to do is that it's rendering out using RAM memory what this whole thing is going to look like. And once it's done thinking, it will play it back in real time, and we'll get a sense of the job that we did. Almost done thinking. That looks pretty good. Now, there's just one last detail we're going to do before we render this. And we're going to go to Layer, New, and we're going to add an adjustment layer. And we will click and we will call that Vignette. And I'm going to click up here into our Shape tool, and I'm going to pick Ellipse. And with our vignette layer selected, I'm going to double click the ellipse, and that is going to create this oval vignette. And if you see, if I kind of like come away from it, it creates this little rectangle. If I click and hold and drag, it'll select that 1 pixel, and it will allow me to create a mask so that we can darken our edges, because when you're compositing an image, having darker edges helps make it all the more believable. Okay, And so this mask, we want to, it's selected as add now. So basically let's go ahead and darken this. And we will use, which one do we want to use? We'll use levels for that. We'll take levels and we'll drag that into that layer. And you'll see that we have control over our black levels, our white levels, and here's our gamma, which controls the gray space. And we just kind of want to drag it right till it darkens up a little bit. But this is the opposite that we want, right? So what we'll do is that we'll make this mask subtract, and then we will twirl down the properties and we'll go to the feather mode, and let's feather it a lot, like 350 pixels. And I'm going to turn off the seeing the mask shape, and you'll see how much more believable our whole space becomes. Alright, so that's all good. Now we're going to render this. So we will go to Composition, Pre-Render, and that will open up the render queue. We'll click on the output. We will take it to your folder, and it says GS Final, your name, right? So that's good. And then we'll tell it what we want to save it as. And we don't need the sound, so we won't click that. We're going to click Format Options, and we're going to tell it to make it an H.264 file, quality 100%, and it's already set to be 1920 by 1080, so we'll click OK, and then we will click Render, and it will render out the shot and play that back in QuickTime. And if it looks all right to you, then post that on D2L.